the theme of this series is to disrupt the certainty that I observe people having around certain topics. But the purpose of this is to gain clarity. And that oftentimes what we need to do in order to gain clarity is deconstruct some of these ideas that we have, and particularly when they are so certain or we have confidence around certain topics or certain ideas. So we're here to re-examine, to dig a little deeper, and not necessarily to be thorough or complete, but as an introduction to give us things to think about.
Yeah, I sit in the seat of the general audience. So I'm really excited to dig into ritual and understand it not in the common way that I understand the word ritual, but to understand it in a way that I might not be thinking about it. And that's what this is really all about, is to kind of turn a topic on its head and see what I might be missing. And so the word habit automatically comes to mind. And I think throughout this conversation, we'll make the distinction between habits and rituals. I'm really interested in your perspective on the space that ritual holds for humans and the importance of it, and then the places where it's happening in our world and our lives, and what makes it so important. And then of course we always talk about kind of how there's a social erosion happening. And the question that we ask in this podcast is, once we understand the importance of what ritual really is, and then we understand how it's being eroded in our culture or our society, then we can understand what humans are losing, what the cost of that is. And that's the place where we usually land in terms of reverse engineering and saying, let's bring back not just the idea of ritual, but the real underpinning value of ritual, so that we as humans can flourish.
So much of these topics we're trying to be more additive, not subtractive. And what I observe in culture and societies and individuals is when we have less masterful thinking or less masterful behavior in certain domains like ritual or logic or whatever our topics are, that they become ineffective, and then we ditch them. Society ditches them, individuals ditch them. And really, it's not the topic or the thing itself, it's how we're using them. And so with ritual, the first place and really the focus of ritual for me is around the words symbol and lingering. That symbols are something that we've lost contact with in a machine-driven world, in an AI-driven world, in the fourth industrial revolution. Humans are very much reducing, we're trained to reduce information and data to something literal. And we've lost our connection to symbol. And ritual is a way that we can engage symbol. And by the way, in human decision intelligence, we work with symbol as a primary focus, and not just in ritual, but in the ways that we think and in the ways that we orient ourselves to be connected to semiotics is really a critical way we process as human beings. So now we return to ritual, and ritual is a place that we can engage symbol, where we bring our attention to something, and attention can be a form of love. It's focus. It's something that we are giving our whole selves to, and that is important for humans to be able to sit with something long enough to start interpreting it differently, or to give it meaning, or to give it different kinds of meaning. So the two words would be symbol and lingering. What ritual provides humans is time, which is a lot of repetition, spaciousness, where through which we embody. As humans, we don't embody well without repetition and without time. So time and repetition are really important to becoming and embodiment. And then the use of symbol, of how we can transfer and make meaning out of something that's less literal, but stands for something, that represents something, that helps us make a connection to something less literal and more expansive.
Yeah, there's a couple of things that came to mind. I think we can keep going on that thread, but I have this post-it note next to me where I'm always taking all of my notes. And there's two kinds of processing that I'm really familiar with. It's the intellectual knowledge of something, it could be anything, and then the experience, the experiential knowledge. And when those two come together, it creates something new in how I'm able to move forward or apply that thing. But the third element of that, which I came across recently, is symbolic. And this is a whole other entity. I think it's another layer of attaching meaning or gaining understanding, that we can understand not just the intellectual or the personal experience, but that there's some other, it's like a poetic expression of this thing. Is that how you would say it? It's adding some layer of meaning. I'm trying to kind of figure out how that lands in ritual as you're attaching it to symbol.
Yeah, so the idea is like, for example, when I make my tea every morning, I bring an intention to the tea as that when I slow things down and when I can connect to what me pouring the water into the kettle represents, like a filling up for the day and something that's fresh water that's running that I have to fill up and I have to wait and watch the water run and fill up. And then I have to wait for the water to boil. And then I have to put in my matcha powder and sift it. And the process of making tea is a symbol of life in so many ways, in the different stages of life or the different parts of our day, the different places where we have to wait, the places where we watch something form. And then for me, as I stir it, as I whisk, this whisking has to have the right kind of speed, otherwise it splashes out. And so in this ritual, I'm noticing these things because my attention is brought out to the forefront. I'm noticing, oh, this requires a certain kind of patience. It requires a certain kind of formation, speed, energy, right? Like sequencing that kind of match how we grow and match the mistakes that we make in life, right? Just even in this little 5-minute ritual. And then I can bring a certain prayer or mantra to it. And then that kind of puts my attention into a different place. And these rituals, this isn't my original idea. Obviously, rituals are ancient, but they're a way to reach the heart, not just the mind. And that's why rituals are important to embodiment, is because it's not something that we're only intellectually engaging in. It's something that the repetition and the time that it requires is a way that it reaches our heart. And it's through these meditations. They're active meditations. That's what a ritual is. It's an active meditation that ends up reaching different parts of ourselves and allows the symbol to emerge. So certain days I'm noticing certain things that are representative of my growth or my obstacles or my frustration, or it doesn't matter what it is, right? I'm connecting to something beyond the literal sight of a green powder. It's more than that.
So it's a space to practice all of these skills that we talk about in terms of noticing, gaining intel, processing it, this lingering as we talk about liminality and spaces of waiting to notice what surfaces. And then ultimately, these skills build capacity and the ability to notice patterns or to track and measure a kind of internal growth because it's you in relation to this very kind of stable process.
Yes. And additionally, that in our modern world, we're a culture and people of immediacy. And that immediacy, as we know, has many drawbacks, also some advantages. But we rush through our day mentally, physically, emotionally, relationally. We are moving from one thing to the next. And all of our primary points of contact in a machine driven world with the digital world are disappearing. They disappear, they vanish. It's very one to the next. There's less permanence, there's less stability. And so ritual grounds us to time and lingering and in a kind of formation that something becomes stable. It exists versus disappearing. And that's also something really important to our humanity. We're physical creatures and we live in a physical world, also a digital world. But as we're transversing from the digital to the physical, we need practices and focus that grounds us physically as well as, as how we navigate the digital world. We navigate different worlds differently. And it's becoming increasingly more important as the digital world is advancing, of course, to return to some of our physical practices. And it's not just physical, right? Like what we just said, it's emotional. And it's a way that humans grow and transform, similar to our exercising. I mean, it's really difficult to make our bodies different if we're not getting into the gym or going on walks or whatever, right? So there's a comparison there.
And there's this intentionality that we bring to a physical routine or ritual that gives it meaning, allows us to tap into what's happening in our deeper emotional states. You referenced it as the heart. But it could be that they're drawing out of other deeper places, maybe deeper places lodged in our subconscious or in our physical body, like if we're tapping our foot or something, the kind of impatience is surfacing, possibly in many different ways. And I mean, I think it's obvious, but just to explicitly state what we're losing in the culture of convenience and speed are these moments. So in my earlier reference of the kind of intellectual experience, matcha's good for you, the taste experience that you want to drink matcha. And then the kind of symbolic is how the process of making matcha can ground you in a space where there's so much information about your day or contemplation that can take place to bring you into a deeper state of being. And that's where the real gold is in terms of adding layers and dimensions to our processing.
Yes, and I think in the past, and the reason why many individuals and cultures have abandoned ritual is because they lost meaning and became empty, just empty repetitions. And what makes a ritual meaningful and grounded and have all these benefits that we're talking about versus not is really the individual who's doing the ritual and how we approach in our focus and intention and our heart. And it can be very easily become meaningless and void and empty and a waste of time. So that is, I think, the ultimate question is how are we approaching the practices? How are we approaching these landscapes, the human landscapes of the mind and the heart and the body and nature and our relationships? It's not the landscapes themselves, but it's how we're engaging and navigating and approaching these landscapes. And what I love about ritual is that it's a way to make something special or sacred that isn't outside of our intention, right? Like, going to the bathroom or brushing your teeth. I mean, we could make a ritual out of anything. And what we do in that moment of ritualizing something is we give it meaning and significance where it didn't have any before. And so is it possible that that's overdone? Yes. Like, are there people and groups of people who are, over spiritualizing everything or making meaning out of everything that becomes too extreme, and in that meaning making loses meaning. And we talk about this in other parts of human decision intelligence, how that can happen. So I want to acknowledge that the conversation isn't about elevating these tools or these practices as much as it is how we approach it, how we can be more intelligent in our humanity, and how that actually gifts us things. But it's not the thing itself.
Whenever I have a really long travel day, it's that shower that I take when I first get home and land. Well, I guess on either side, whether I'm landing in my new location or landing back at home, there is a specific kind of shower that I take that's so ritualistic. And it represents being there and being done with the travel day in the way that I'm cleaning all of that off and getting extra clean in some way to really relax into the space that I am. And in some ways, it's a celebration of landing, right? So, yeah, that's just a simple example. It's not like overdone. There aren't 47 steps. There's one special product actually, and it was through choosing this product with an intention of self-care and then using just a little bit of it in the shower that I was able to form a ritual where I pause and it's a moment of self-care. And so it's silly, but there's ways that we can integrate small. I think the repetition was something you mentioned that I'm noticing is a key.
It's repetition and value and time. So, like, it's what are the values that we have that we can embody? Our values can be just mental assents, right? Or agreements that we have. But how do we bring them into our lives and into our body? That is the importance of ritual. So, you just described being in a kind of washing off, the whatever travel energy of anxiety or who knows what it is, like anything that could be negative or even positive, where you're moving from one positive thing into the next, which is a kind of liminality, right? There is a respect for that in your mind and in your heart, but how does one embody that? And we use symbol to do it. And then symbol is activated in ritual. So it's like, oh, what can I do to symbolize this movement from one thing to the next, or whether it's dirty to clean or it's clean to a different kind of clean, or whatever it is. It's like, oh, let's make something ritual with intention. This now symbolizes something because it's meaningful and it's honoring that symbol. And in a way, that is how we create. We create our truth. We create reality. We create so much of our experiences in life by using symbol and creating meaning. And the little things, I think, are even maybe more important than the big things. I don't think we need to spend 2 hours in a church service necessarily through, religious constructs of the past, right? That were maybe too much, but doing little things all day long that are meaningful to us, that remind us who we are as humans, that remind us and connect us to our values so that they don't evaporate in the digital and in the machine kind of thinking where there is just this evaporation. There's not enough time or focus on substance. And so, as humans, we're creators and we need to create substance, but not empty and not, substitutions, which we talk about this in human decision intelligence. It's not about substituting something meaningful with something that is surface. This is the practice of creating something that's truly substantive, but also requires self reflection because there's times where our rituals no longer are meaningful to us. And then we need to create new ones.
Yeah. This shower example is like less than 30 seconds, just a portion of the shower. But the days when I skip it and I get out of the shower without doing it, I notice that in myself. And I kind of am like, oh, that was a missed opportunity, right? So dilution of ritual, maybe it got boring or other things were more enticing and stole our attention in ways that suddenly the 17th step Japanese tea ceremony didn't hold value like it did when there wasn't other forms of entertainment.
I think is the invitation in human decision intelligence is to become more masterful in our use of tools and to actually have more and more tools, additive. And that is a more sophisticated way of living, but also more nuanced and more contextual and it requires us to be more in touch with what is actually useful, what is not useful, and where are those moments and what context. And then it forces us too to be more active participants as creators, that we are creating by ourselves and together as a society and as individuals. And what we're trying to do is become a kind of people that can build an existence now and into our future that is nourishing and that is less harmful and that brings more joy and more intelligent things that we build. We want to build more intelligently. That's our motivation, right? The motivation isn't just to be like, ritual people of good ritual or, good, I don't know, healthy people in our bodies alone. It's a bunch of different things that all add up to the good life and to feeling fulfilled in our work and fulfilled in our life. And that is what human decision intelligence is all about. And then we can break it down to how that is applied in specific situations like work.
Here's a great example. Thanks for that segue. That was a great tee up. I worked at Starbucks corporate and they began every single meeting with a coffee tasting. And this brought them back to their values that coffee was core to everything that they did. And so the Starbucks corporate building is 4 wings, multiple stories, giant. People are constantly, almost literally running from meeting to meeting with like the whole stack in their arms, the laptop, the pen, the book, the coffee, all of the things in their hand. And everyone gets there. I'm just going to kind of say like metaphorically out of breath, right? Like we run from meeting to meeting metaphorically as much as we do live. And then there'd be a coffee tasting and there's these really cool coffee passports. And it's a moment for everyone to just kind of inhale and exhale and ground themselves in why they're there. And it was really cool. It would be led by an individual. They had selected the coffee, brewed it for everyone, and everyone shared their tasting notes. And it was kind of like work was put on pause for a moment. And there was a different kind of presence and connection because people were reminded what they were uniting around. And I always do yoga with this one instructor. She says, like, it's not that serious. Like, and so it was like a good reminder, like, people, this is about coffee, this is just about coffee. And then the meeting would proceed. And this was interesting because I was a member of a tea company that was acquired by Starbucks. And so the ritual of tea then became that we were able to introduce different, of course, they have different brewing styles in coffee, but then we were able to introduce different ritualistic brewing styles of tea. And cast iron teapots that come from Japan are one of the most ritualistic styles. Compare like the spectrum of a cast iron teapot, which is handmade, to a tea bag, which represents kind of an on the go, convenient society. And so there was just a lot of material to work with, I would say. And I was really impressed that you add up the number of minutes of unproductivity by starting meetings with a coffee tasting. And that this company was not just committed to it in the corporate space, but even in their stores, they do it. It really does trickle down into the culture of the people who work directly with customers.
Well, that's another advantage of ritual is that's ancient is this idea of beauty and respect that we can, if we're communally engaging in ritual, we create a kind of beauty and reverence or respect for whatever exists in that moment, whatever we're agreeing to as a community. And that can be overdone, right? And it has throughout history, which is why we're abandoning ritual now. But when it's done well, this is something that I think is a kind of human flourishing where there is an ability to create beauty and reverence together, where we make the banal beautiful and meaningful. That increases the quality of our life and it connects us to our creativity and beauty in a way that makes us more productive and better workers, better people, better creators, right? In all of the ways. So I think it's really great example of how cultures can communally create rituals that bring us back to meaning and values that we share and to make something more reverent. And so that's is the invitation is to return to that, not in a way that we're returning to overdoing it or creating an empty ritual to where we're just going through the motions that we don't actually believe in and we're not actually connected to. So I think that is the balance is how can we use our tools more masterfully that provide us advantages versus throwing them out entirely because we're not using them well and they become not useful anymore.
Yeah. I mean, it's a couple of distinctions that I want to make sure we're really clear on are the difference between ritual and habit.
Yeah, and the difference between ritual and habit is really just the intention, right? Is that something we habitually do is more thoughtless. It's something that is part of our neural pathways that just by repeating over and over thoughtlessly, that's a habit, right? Or something that we have pre-decided and predetermined that was useful and valuable, but something that we don't really need to engage in mentally or emotionally, like brushing our teeth or even going to the gym, right? We have a different kind of intention around. I mean, if we're doing our, workouts well, we are connected mentally, right? But it's a different kind of focus and an intention than a ritual would be. And I think that part of that focus and intention is around the symbol of it and around the significance beyond the literal outcome. That's one of the distinctions, right? Like when you can make tea habitually, which is just like, oh, I like tea, I value tea, it's good for me, and I do it every morning, and it has an outcome. And the habit is based on the outcome. Or we could make it into a ritual where there's something that's that plus, oh, this is representing something. This is symbolizing something. This is a way that I can start my day and connect to something greater than myself. That is a huge distinction too between ritual and habit is that ritual usually if done well is forcing us outside of a self orientation and it's connecting us to something bigger than the self, which habit doesn't do. So much of our lives are oriented around our emotional experience or our particular mental engagement. And when we engage in ritual, it's something that buffers that creates a distance. If it's not only about the self, we're connecting to something greater than our immediate experience or a preferred outcome where we're limiting our action based on an outcome or we're going through the motions because we have to. There's something bigger than us when we engage ritual.
Yeah, another thing I heard you say that I just want to call out was it was being committed to the process and what is useful in the process versus the outcome. So, like going to the gym is a habit because it's like to get fit, right? But making tea is, if you engage tea in a ritualistic way, it's not so much about the cup of tea at the end, it's about the process of making it. That's a really big distinction. And we always talk about process versus outcome, right?
100%. And
Yeah.
it's both. And I think that so much of like to relate it back to human decision intelligence is that if when one focuses on the quality of the process, the outcomes are automatically, without trying, better. And often we discover outcomes that are more intelligent than the ones we set out to execute. And so I think ritual fits nicely into that if done well. If the focus is on the process of it, the focus is on the repetition and engaging it symbolically, but it's not without an outcome. The outcomes are just inevitable and they're qualitatively better because there is a different kind of intention and focus and respect. And that process itself not only elevates the outcome, but often makes the outcome more intelligent and better. And we kind of know that, like, right, like when something is homemade, food is homemade with love, it tastes better to us.
Yeah, when
Why
you
is
take the
that?
time to fresh chop the ginger and the, garlic versus getting something prepackaged or using some spice from a can. Okay, I also want to just take a moment. We don't have to go too deep into this, but pause and acknowledge all of the stuff that we always hear about the power of ritual. And we hear it in all these different contexts and society. So, how is what we're saying the same as that? And how is what we're offering different or unique from what we often hear in society about the power of ritual?
Well, I think right now we're in a stage socially where ritual isn't appreciated or discussed much outside of, maybe it's thrown in with our distaste for religiosity. But outside of that, I don't hear a lot of positive points around ritual. It's much more about habit, the power of habits, the power of practice, the power of engaging in certain kind of algorithms or what we call as prescriptions to help you become this or to do this, right? And in many ways that is in the same space as ritual, because anything that's engaging repetition or practice is in the same landscape. But I don't hear a lot specifically about ritual, and this is the point, is that in the past ritual I think has been disliked because it's something that has had a negative experience inside religious practices. It's lost its meaning and became a bunch of people just doing it for the sake of doing it because it was tradition. And I'm kind of in that camp too, that I don't really like that. Doing things just for the sake of tradition can be nice in certain cases for a limited amount of time, but ultimately it has to be something that we're recreating. We have to create our own rituals and then recreate them together. So we're not necessarily abandoning our history or tradition, whether it's in our family or in our culture or even just from our own self, from 20 years ago, but that we're iterating and that we're recreating and we're taking our past into our present. And so I don't hear a lot of conversation around ritual at all. And if it does occur, I think it's probably more negative. But what I think we're filling the gap in is around habits and around our digital and immediate culture where things vanish, where they evaporate. And so, what we want to think through is, what is the process of embodiment? What are the processes of better human engagement that actually naturally and organically create better outcomes for ourselves, and all the things that we've listed, whether it's our body health or our health in our relationships, or how more efficient we can be in our work, all of the things in every domain of a human life. How we practice being human is maybe what human decision intelligence is all about, is becoming better humans, in our
Practicing
practices.
being human. I like that.
Practices being human. That,
That's
I
great.
think is a lot of what human decision intelligence is. So I don't think that the ideas around ritual are super provocative at this stage, other than they kind of map alongside the history of religion. And that's not what we're talking about here. Although it's fine if we should be recreating our religious rituals as well, I think.
And religious rituals are performed in an embodied way in some kind of sacred place where they actually have meaning, that it's not just this kind of rote repetition. They can be really beautiful. I've certainly experienced that. These age old, ancient traditions done with new, fresh energy and intentionality.
100%. And equally so, some of the rituals that have existed throughout time are still useful and beneficial and don't always need an upgrade. I think maybe it's more about, again, how and when we choose to engage our rituals. That is what we're bringing, is that we don't need to abandon any ritual. It's how do we more intelligently use our own humanity and the history of human practices to become more fulfilled and more intelligent in how we live.
Okay, so I want to hear the strawberry story. I've already heard it obviously. But the strawberry story, the $18 strawberry. We talked about how this allowed you and a friend to enter a kind of ritualistic state where it was something novel and fun and it brought you together.
Oh, that's hilarious. Yeah, so one of my friends was visiting from out of town, and he had heard of this 18, $19 strawberry that was being flown in regularly from Japan. And so we went to the store just out of curiosity, like white people do, although he's not white. But I just have to say that because it was really bizarre to be going and investigating, a $20 strawberry. I mean, who does that? White people. So we went and got this strawberry just to see what in the world doesn't, an $18 strawberry taste like. And part of the way that I kind of justified this strange human behavior of spending so much money on something that is seemingly ridiculous and kind of, absurd, we decided to make a ritual out of it. And I think the company also had this in the intention because the company had said, read these instructions, right? Before you eat the strawberry, it has to be left out, to room temperature. And then you have to cut it a certain way. And I think that so there were two things happening. One, the company and a part of its marketing strategy was to ritualize something, to make it special. This isn't just a strawberry. This is evidenced not only by its size or its price or its location, but how the consumer engages the ritual of eating this. And that was what was really interesting. And as a matter of fact, I was already aligned to that ritual before I even knew the company had developed a ritual around it because it seemed like it was the only way to justify spending $20 for a strawberry. And in a way, it did work. It's like, oh, this was a special experience. Very few people are going to spend $20 on a strawberry regularly. So it was built into this product is the fact that it was an actual ritual. You are not either whether you eat this alone or whether you eat it with people, it's not an everyday experience. And it's coming from a place and its size and its variety are all special and therefore demanded a ritual. And I think this is a perfect metaphor for how ritual can enhance and create a meaningful experience.
I have to take it to the dark side now because something Starbucks realized was that people, maybe a lot of people, don't really see the difference between ritual and habit. And so they capitalized on being the third place, knowing that people needed a liminal space between home and work and home, play dates, all of the places that you are when you decide to go to Starbucks and get your cup of coffee and spend however much it is. And so, what's going on there in terms of leveraging people's need or desire for this kind of habitual ritualization? And I think a lot of people can even maybe justify their monthly Starbucks spend on self care in some way. So, what's going on there?
Well, this kind of intersects with another one of our topics around substitutions. And I think that in a society that is more immediate, more vaporous, less grounded, we have abandoned these places that anchor us in a lot of ways, including ritual. That humans need rituals. And most cultures, and particularly you've traveled more than I have, Chelsea, that so many cultures have their social rituals, whether it's going and getting gelato every afternoon or getting, the espresso every morning. It's a communal experience that we need. And our culture, American culture, has definitely abandoned that. And now what's happened is in that void, capitalism, it has a huge opportunity to fill a human need with a substitution rather than the real thing. So some kind of, I call it saccharin, fake sugar. Instead of, having real intimacy, which is what humans crave, we're going to substitute it with pornography or, whatever, a romance novel or something. It makes us feel the things like we are really there and we actually have a relationship, but we don't. And so that, I think, is a huge issue in our society, is how we have these needs that we aren't aware that we're not meeting, and how we're out of balance in terms of our digital and physical existence in a machine versus human world. And how can we do both so that we're really engaging all of the landscapes of our future humanity? And I think this is I'm glad you pointed out. I think it's a big, big issue.
Yeah, I'm asking the same question in different ways, but just to say it one more time, what human need is ritual satisfying?
Ritual satisfies a human need to connect with meaning. And that is the importance of semiotics, is that we are fundamentally creative creatures that need to create and engage in imagination and engage in possibility and engage in realities that are beyond ourselves, and a self orientation, that it's around others or something that's more expansive in the universe. How does human beings tap into the creative powers that are beyond the self? That's what we're designed to do in a really fundamental way. And ritual connects us to those things, something that we can create meaning, that we can attach and bring attention and see metaphors, that we can linger to contemplate and to experience our imagination and to make connections that are not literal or only literal. This is all a part of the creativity of being human, that not only connects us to our own self and our souls, but connects us to others. The deep part of the human fulfillment is this creative process, and it's not limited to any one thing. And ritual is a big part of how repetition and symbolism helps us to embody our values and beliefs, and even recognize what our values and beliefs are. There's actually an author who wrote a book on ritual, and I can't remember his name, but he actually, not my idea, but his, said that ritual is the process of recognition, that humans need to recognize truth, or reality or each other or whatever it is. There needs to be a recognition, and that recognition can ground us into a place of being. Even if we move and we become different things, it requires recognition. And ritual is tied to the practice of recognition.
Throughout your life, as you've experimented with different rituals, how did you come to this thought, this insight, this practice? How did you evolve into making your tea with this kind of intention?
One of the big drivers for me in my growth practices is art and creativity, in the same way that I mentioned earlier, that realizing so much of being human is about engaging our creativity and creating and building things. And so as a result of that, I look to art, and art teaches us in so many ways how to be human. And one of the big things that art does for us is that when we engage beauty and creativity and the imagination, we are reorganizing ourselves, usually through non literal experiences. And so symbolism and semiotics are a huge value that I have. And so I'm naturally, and have been naturally, oriented around where are the symbolism here and the meaning from which I can create, or which I can engage to have new ideas and to be regenerative, to regenerate myself or to ground myself or to get beyond myself. And so I think that I live my life as a creative act. And so finding rituals organically in through my own values. So I just one day realized that I had a habit of making tea, and there was something so pleasurable about it. It was something I enjoyed. And so I think what I've noticed in my own practices around ritual is I usually create rituals around something that brings me pleasure, something that is deeply enjoyable to me and fundamentally has intrinsic meaning, even without me thinking about it. And then that pleasure brings my attention to it. And then I can work with that experience of pleasure. Why? What is it? And engage that. So it's not limited, obviously, to my matcha making, but there's places that I look for it everywhere, and I switch it up. And also, my life isn't overly filled with ritual either, but there are a few key places that allow me to connect with the invisible truths. And I think that That's what ritual does. And that's so much of what human intelligence is looking for, is what are the invisible places that we're not giving enough attention that end up being critical to reducing our suffering and gaining intelligence and mastery so that we can live more fulfilling lives and do our work in greater, more expansive, intelligent ways.
That sounds like a good place for people to start if they're thinking about where they might add ritual or try to enter the space of ritual. Looking to the places that are already pleasurable. Like clearly, my rituals are showing me I love to take showers. Because that's where they happen. I love to be clean. So looking to the places where you already spend time, the things you're already drawn to that make you smile, that bring you joy, that bring you pleasure, that you enjoy both the process and the outcome. And then maybe like starting to integrate some intentionality in the way that you see the artistic movements or tap into the different senses, the sequencing required to do this, even mundane task.
That's perfect.
That's the place to start.
We're not trying to be comprehensive in deconstructing these topics or the ideas, but bring certain topics to people's attention so that we can disrupt their opinions or certainty around them to gain clarity and then see how the possibility of the different ways of thinking can be beneficial.
Yeah, my interest is really in how what people are losing and how they can reclaim it through all the topics that we talk about. So I'm constantly thinking, okay, the listener has a million things to do and a lot of tips and tricks add a million more things to do. And so the question becomes, how can we recognize what the cost to humans, the cost to human beings is that we've lost over the years from these ancient practices? And then how can we reclaim some of that in ways that don't feel like it's adding extra work to our plate, but that we can source more meaning, gain more pleasure, and then create more beauty in the world as a result? Connecting to ourselves, connecting to others, and connecting to things outside of ourselves, higher powers.
Yeah, I think a lot of the intention around bringing up these topics is, even if people can't necessarily employ some new tool or some new practice, the idea is to think about it in a way that increases the recognition in the world and in society. So that now you can make observations. You can see this. And sometimes when we're not presented with a new idea or a new take on an old idea, it's harder to see. So much of our intention here is like, hey, observe this, see if this matches your experience. Investigate this or examine this, or when you notice something new because of thinking about it differently, that in itself is the point.
Talk to us about where habits are becoming rituals or where rituals have degraded into habits and what you're trying and experimenting. Like that's the feedback I want, is how is this landing for people? How is it being noticed in new ways in whatever spaces the people who listen or engage with this work are? I mean, that's what human decision intelligence is. People always ask what it is, and it's happening around us all the time. It's noticing, analyzing, processing. But a ritual, I'm really excited to start noticing in my own rituals how I can gain new sources of intel, even if it's just tapping into the creative space, to the wonder and awe, to the unknown, and moving from that place throughout my day. So
I think that is another intention of this series, is to make a distinction between certainty and clarity. And that really there's so much uncertainty in the world. And engaging that uncertainty and being okay with uncertainty is actually the path to gaining clarity. And having more clarity it feels good. It feels really good. And it really helps with the decision making and with embodying what we believe. So that is well said, Chelsea, in the sense of there's so much uncertainty, but instead of trying to gain certainty, we often lose clarity and we lose mastery. And so we're just helping people notice things they may have not noticed already. And even in the act of noticing and observing, we're gaining all kinds of intelligence.
I love how you started this conversation with the practice of performing a ritual is the space to practice the skills of being and becoming a human being. I thought that was really, yeah, that it's in the practice. Very cool.